It is a great honor for Amanda and me to give this Devar Torah jointly, and it has been a great blessing for us to prepare it. Several months ago, we started studying together in Chavruta, a very lovely change from the kinds of meetings we ordinarily have. And we went over our parsha line by line, talking over ideas, big and small. And in conversation, we created this side-by-side commentary on Parshat Shmini. This process strengthened our relationship and brought us both joy, which is a piece of Torah that we wanted to make explicit and to share with you along with our words.
Many contemporary readers find the priestly parts of Torah alien or alienating. One way in is to consider that the priestly is the language of art, as in the construction of the tabernacle and its furnishings, in which each detail conveys worlds of meaning. The tabernacle is an especially powerful expression of human creativity in that it provides an opportunity for people to engage in a work of creation that parallels the creation of the world. The priestly parts of Torah also contrast with the otherworldliness that our culture attributes to the spiritual. They are profoundly, even uncomfortably material, with far more discussion of oozing sores than most of us would be likely to incorporate into our spiritual writing. And now the pandemic has given us a new experience of purification. One of my favorite SNL sketches involves a group of friends visiting a fortune teller in 2019. The things she tells them about their lives in the coming year are comically incomprehensible to their clients and all too familiar to the SNL viewers watching from that future. For example, she tells one client that she sees her boyfriend washing a bag of chips with soap, and the client yelling at him to use more soap. In moving through such incomprehensible experiences, we've moved closer to the world of Vayikra. We now know something about managing contagion, and we have a new capacity to appreciate holiness.
Vayikra, the whole book, is about the relationship between humans and the divine, mediated through sacrifices offered by priests. The book's Hebrew name suggests the centrality of relationships. It begins, that first verse, Vayikra Adonai el Moshe, Vayidaber Adonai elav me'ohel mo'ed lemor. And Yud He Vav He called to Moshe and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying. So this short pasuk, this introductory line, includes Vayidaber, God spoke, lemor, God said, but it begins with Vayikra, and God called. And it is the calling that creates the relationship. Yesterday, Shahana McKinney-Baldwin offered up the image of Tzimtzum for our work about becoming, in all the ways that we seek to become as an inclusive community, contraction and expansion, contraction and expansion. Here, God does Tzimtzum, God contracts, and then calls out so that Moshe can step forward to be a partner rather than just a glorified stenographer. The major focus of Leviticus is a variety of sacrifices offered at the altar of the Mishkan. And those sacrifices are called korbanot, from the root karav, to draw near. Sacrifices were how our ancestors, with the help of the priests, maintained relationships. For them, sacrifices and this handbook of how to do them were about drawing near to take action to achieve individual and communal spiritual equilibrium, to offer repair or atonement or celebration where necessary, to address all the messy things that crop up, all in the service, ultimately, of cultivating holiness. Now, within this drawing near, there are strict rules about boundaries between pure and impure, permitted and unpermitted, and even stricter constraints on the priests in their day-to-day activities that somehow reflect the eternal, and most especially in extraordinary times. For example, when one of them lost a family member, and were barred from most mourning rituals so as not to become impure and thus be unable to offer their service. And our Parsha contains a terse narrative that is especially extraordinary and especially confounding. We have right at the beginning the dramatic and mysterious death of Aaron's sons Nadav and Avihu, as they offered a sacrifice and were consumed by a strange fire. Moses commands Aaron immediately and his remaining sons to refrain from even those few mourning rituals permitted to priests. The one concession was that the rest of Beit Yisrael could mourn these staggering deaths. The temple was destroyed nearly 2,000 years ago. The sacrificial cult was abolished. There is little place now for a hereditary caste of priests as mediators and symbolic exemplars in everyday or extraordinary times. Yet the desire for relationships and pathways to establish and, where necessary, to restore spiritual equilibrium, individual and communal, that remains. And there are some continuities between that time and this one. We know, as did our ancestors, that ritual is transformative. Ours are no longer sacrifices, but we continue to use rituals to help bring order and meaning to moments and spaces that are unbounded, fuzzy, full of pain, or just uncomfortable. Ritual helps us to mark and make transitions. Here we are creating Shabbat because we are intentionally making it together in person, online. We are setting aside the tumult and the demands of our secular week to sanctify time, to remember creation and redemption, to taste even just a little bit a perfect world. Hopefully, your shoulders are a bit lower, your breath a bit slower, your sense of connection to each other and to something larger than yourself a bit deeper. Ritual is like a doorway that helps us to move from one state to another with intention, with connection to the divine, and almost always in Jewish life with the support of community. In the Jewish imagination, community, from that day in our Parsha to this one, this is where we find our fullest humanity and how we orient ourselves most powerfully to the ultimate. It was the community that mourned on behalf of Aaron and his family when they could not. Community holds us up and holds us together in the everyday, at moments of joy, when things are falling apart or torn apart. And the desire for holiness, for awe and pureness and wholeness and communion, that too remains, even if the means to achieve it are less clear.
I don't think Vayikra is necessarily as judgy as it tends to come across to contemporary North American readers. The words we use to translate tahor and tameh reek of judgment: clean, unclean, pure, impure. The Hebrew words don't have that baggage. And while being a clean or pure animal sounds like the preferred category, the consequence of that category for animals is that they get to be sacrificed and eaten, while unclean animals are simply left alone. For Vayikra, being tahor, clean, plays an important role, but being tameh is an ordinary part of life, and not everything that causes one to be tameh is perceived as negative. To convey this, I like to translate tahor and tameh as eligible and ineligible. Failing a drug test or violating NCAA rules make a college athlete ineligible, but then so does graduating and moving on from school. When it comes to animals, I like to translate tahor and tameh as fair game and off limits. When a friend inspired me to take on a regular mikveh practice, I found the idea of being tameh surprisingly inspiring. It helped that misogynistic attitudes toward menstruation did not play a significant role in my life beyond what persists in popular culture. I didn't have to contend with the idea that menstruation makes someone so dirty they need a magic bath. Based on this Parsha's use of tahor and tameh to characterize animals, I associated the distinction between tahor and tameh with something like the distinction between domesticated animals who live in close relation with humans and wild animals that are free. So in my own life, being tameh meant having time to focus on not defining myself through my relationships, especially to my husband and children, and to embrace being a wild thing and belonging to myself. And when that time was up, I would immerse in the mikveh and reconsecrate myself to God and to myself, embracing the truest part of who I am and who I aspire to be. To my husband, renewing our relationship, and to my children, choosing them as they are and envisioning their best selves. Sometimes it's hard for me to be the only neurotypical one in my household. One Shabbat morning was particularly difficult, and it resulted in us arriving at shul 45 minutes after my daughter was supposed to be at religious school. Adding to the challenge was the fact that some of us were upset about being late, and others of us were not. So as I joined the other parents streaming the service at Mishkan Shalom, I hardly knew what to do with my embarrassment and frustration. And then Rabbi Yael Levy called us to embrace the divinity in the messiness of life. I've held on to that idea for months now, and it still astonishes me to consider that the chaos of my household is not an obstacle to holiness, but a vehicle for it. In the different ways that we perceive the passage of time, in the different structures of our thoughts, and especially in the way that we keep trying to work with one another across these differences, there is holiness. Vayikra pays so much attention to sores that ooze and houses that get mold because God dwells among people who experience such things. And while we certainly could read the specific ways that Vayikra handles those things as condemnation of those experiences, we could also consider that it's not introducing a negative valuation, but rather setting limits to one that already exists. And in a broader sense, we can notice that the same book that so graphically explores the ways in which we are messy and our lives are messy is also the book that most thoroughly contemplates the presence of God among us and invites us to be holy.
As Rabbi Rachel taught, our parsha, as ever, gets its name from the first pasuk, Vayhi bayom hashmini, and it came to pass on the 8th day, that the Mishkan, the subject of so many chapters and parshiot before this, was finally consecrated. There are many ways to count. Today, I invite you to get to 8 by adding 7 plus 1. 7 has always been a powerful number in Judaism, made so by our whole planet's, our whole species' origin story, when God created the earth in 6 days and then completed creation by resting on Shabbat, this 7th day. Rabbinic commentary overflows with the teaching that the building of and the tending to the Mishkan in our Torah is a mirror to the creation of the world. God made a home for humanity, and as soon as they were freed from bondage in Egypt to enter into covenant with Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, the Israelites built a tabernacle as a symbolic home for God. Here we have this yearning for nearness again. The root of Mishkan, the Hebrew word for tabernacle, is shachan, the same root for neighbor, for dwelling place, for Shekhinah. On this 8th day, the Mishkan was consecrated, and this too was the day when Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons, were consumed by strange fire. This was a day of tremendous celebration and deep mourning, and a command to Aaron not to mourn, and a collective forging forward somehow. All this is bound up together. All the complexity of life, relationships, and roles and responsibilities, messiness and sanctification, so much pain alongside tremendous potential, what Pema Chodron calls the wretchedness and the glory. As foreign as this story may be to us, there is also so much that is familiar. The desire for the connection to the divine, the centrality of relationships and community, the search for a path toward holiness and equilibrium, how easily it can all fall apart, how hard it is to know how to proceed.
Vayikra embodies a contradiction. On the one hand, it emphasizes bringing order and thereby creating meaning. At the same time, it affirms connection in the midst of difference, connection to diverse aspects of ourselves, as well as connection to one another across the differences in our bodies and our positions in the world. Together, these ideas invite us to find the holiness amidst what we might perceive as messy. The pandemic made the reality of our interconnection tangible, sometimes terrifyingly so. We have seen how we are all impacted by one another's choices and how leaving people behind keeps us all from moving forward. For Vayikra, holiness is something we cultivate together.
The eighth day is ultimately about human creativity in partnership with the divine. The eighth day is what we make of all that we are given, even when we err, even when we are imperfect. We need to start again. We have the tools and the wisdom to reconstruct holiness, to draw on and, where necessary, create new ritual or reconstruct existing ritual, and to build community that is powerful and accountable, reflective and responsive, genuinely inclusive and open to transformation. In our day, we must together, biyachad, create our own pathways toward equilibrium, equity, chesed, loving kindness, and tzedek, justice. There is much work to do. How lucky that we are able to do it together. Shabbat shalom.
Shalom.